They called him mad, yet his silence shook the heavens. They mocked his broken mind, but the gods heard his pain. When pride turned their laughter into cries, the earth swallowed their shame, and the wind carried his voice, not of revenge, but of truth. Years later, the rain returned, the land healed, and his laughter echoed again, soft, forgiving, eternal. They now call him what he always was, the man who spoke with the ancestors, and whose madness was the wisdom that saved them all. The sun rose gently over Nsako village, painting the sky in soft gold and deep orange. Smoke curled from the clay ovens where mothers prepared morning meals, and the steady beat of distant drums echoed like a heartbeat through the valley. Elders sat before their huts, murmuring ancient proverbs to the rhythm of the wind. Children chased one another between the mud houses, their laughter mingling with the song of the birds. The morning air felt alive, yet there was something heavy in it, a sorrow that seemed older than the trees. The villagers often said that when the dawn turned too quiet, the ancestors were watching. And today, the air carried that same silence, a silence that spoke of stories buried beneath the soil. Beneath the sacred baobab tree, where the elders gathered to share wisdom, a circle of villagers whispered in low tones. "He was seen again last night," muttered one woman, her eyes darting toward the dirt path. "The mad wanderer." Another man leaned forward, shaking his head. "Mad? No. Cursed. The spirits took his mind after his wife died. Some say he speaks to ghosts." A young boy, half curious and half afraid, asked, "But why doesn't anyone help him?" The crowd fell silent. No one dared answer. In Nsako, madness was not merely sickness, it was a shadow of shame. They crossed themselves with their fingers and spat on the ground to ward off evil, as the wind sighed softly through the baobab's leaves. From the edge of the village road, a figure emerged. Barefoot. Ragged. His hair tangled like wild vines, his face drawn with lines of sorrow. It was Obidi, once the proud farmer, now the madman of Nsako. He clutched a small wooden carving close to his chest, his fingers tracing its smooth edges like a prayer. "My sons," he whispered to the air, his voice trembling. "You will come home, yes, you will come home when the wind turns." The children hiding nearby giggled, throwing pebbles at his feet. "Go away, crazy man," they shouted. But Obidi only smiled, his eyes distant, as though he were listening to voices the world could no longer hear. The elders watched in silence. Some pitied him. Others turned away. For in Nsako, pity could invite misfortune. The sound of drums shifted, deeper, faster, carrying a rhythm of excitement. From beyond the hill came the glint of sunlight on metal and silk. Two horses rode into view, carrying men dressed in bright city clothes. Gold bracelets shone on their wrists, their shoes gleamed like mirrors. "It's Kina and Jabo," someone shouted. The village erupted in cheer. The twin sons of Nsako had returned, the men who had gone to the city years ago in search of fortune. Women ululated. Children clapped. Even the chief came forward, smiling wide. The twins stepped down proudly, their voices smooth, their laughter sharp. They greeted no one in particular, just waved as though blessing the crowd. "We have come to honor our mother's land," Jabo said loudly. "To show that Nsako's sons can rise above dust." The villagers cheered, not noticing the pride that glittered behind his words. As they passed the old well, an elderly woman whispered softly, "Zuri's sons have come home." The name floated like a ghost through the air. Mama Zuri, the woman whose laughter once filled every corner of Nsako, whose kindness had fed the hungry and soothed the sick. Her spirit lingered in the village still, in the smell of rain and the warmth of firelight. The twins slowed for a brief moment when they saw their old home, now abandoned, its thatched roof half fallen. A flicker of something, regret or memory, crossed Kinna's eyes, but he quickly turned away. "Let it rot," he muttered. "The past belongs to the poor." Jabo laughed and tossed a coin at the children staring at them. "Go buy yourself some bread," he said. The laughter of the crowd drowned the silence that followed. From the shadow of a nearby hut, Elder Nyambi watched quietly, leaning on his carved staff. His old eyes followed the twins, but his heart felt uneasy. He remembered Obidi, not as the madman, but as a proud, wise man who once spoke truth even when it cost him everything. The elder tightened his grip on his staff. He knew the truth about Obidi's fall, about the land and the betrayal that broke his mind. Yet, fear sealed his lips. The spirits would speak soon, he thought. He could feel it in the wind. When truth sleeps too long, he murmured under his breath, the ancestors wake it. The drums grew louder as the festival began. Bright fabrics spun through the air as dancers moved in circles, their feet kicking up dust that sparkled in the sunlight. The smell of roasted maize, honey beer, and spice jam filled the square. The chief stood tall before the crowd and raised his hands. "Let us praise the sons of Nsako," he declared. "They have returned from the city with gold and honor. They are the pride of our soil." The villagers cheered, calling the twins' names. Kinna and Jabo smiled grandly, soaking in the praise. But just beyond the crowd, another figure watched silently, thin, barefoot, and trembling with emotion. Obidi stepped forward, his laugh soft but strange, almost like a sob. He muttered to himself, my sons have come home." His voice broke the rhythm of the drums. The music faltered as heads turned. "Look! The madman," someone shouted. The laughter returned, harsh and sharp. A man threw dust toward him. Another mocked, "Go back to your ghosts, Obidi." But Obidi only smiled weakly, holding out his wooden carving toward the twins. "You have returned, my boys," he said softly. "The land remembers you." Kinna's jaw tightened. Jabo looked away, pretending not to hear. The chief laughed uncomfortably. "Take that fool away," he said, waving his hand. The villagers pushed Obidi back, their laughter echoing through the festival grounds. For a moment, the air grew heavy. Kinna's smile faded, replaced by cold anger. "He shames us," he hissed to his brother. Jabo nodded, eyes burning with embarrassment. "Let him rot in his madness." The crowd whispered, their words like knives. "Can you believe it? The madman calls them his sons." The music resumed, but the drums no longer carried joy. Beneath the sound, a strange silence crept back into the village, the kind of silence that warns of a coming storm. Then the wind changed. It swept suddenly through the square, scattering ashes from the cooking fires and shaking the baobab's massive branches. The drums fell silent once more. The leaves swirled in a small circle at Obidi's feet. He stood still, his head tilted to the sky. The villagers froze as the air turned cool and sharp. Elder Nyambi whispered a prayer under his breath. "Spirits of the ancestors," he murmured, "let mercy guide your hand." The wind howled once, then faded into a deep calm. Obidi lowered his gaze, his eyes bright with something unreadable, sorrow, or maybe warning. The villagers stepped back, uneasy. The drums did not start again that day. And as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Sako village sat in uneasy silence, unaware that their laughter had awakened something far older, a truth buried beneath pride, waiting for the right wind to return. When the festival drums faded into the distance, and the laughter of the night melted into silence, the moon rose above Nsako like a weary witness. The paths glimmered faintly under its silver light as Obidi walked behind his sons, careful not to be seen. His bare feet brushed softly against the dust, leaving prints beside theirs. From the shadows, he watched them, his once small boys, now proud men walking like strangers. Behind closed doors, the villagers whispered among themselves, "Look, the madman follows the rich men again." Their cruel laughter cut through the night like sharp thorns, yet Obidi did not turn back. He moved quietly, carrying the kind of sorrow that cannot be spoken. His eyes followed every step his sons took, and though his heart bled with the pain of rejection, it still beat with the rhythm of love. He was not haunting them, he was guarding them. To the world, he was a ghost of madness, but within him burned the spirit of a father who could not stop protecting what once belonged to his arms. When the twins reached the old family compound, they paused at the gate. The once warm home that had echoed with songs now stood silent, wrapped in the coldness of years. The walls, once smooth and painted by Zuri's gentle hands, were cracked. The air inside was heavy with the smell of dust and time. Kinna laughed bitterly. "This is where we grew up. How did we ever live in such a place?" Jabo smirked, running his hand along the mud wall. "Father used to say this house was our pride." Pride? He spat on the floor. He lived like a peasant and called it honor. They opened the old wooden chest and found only a few tattered mats, a broken drum, and the faded shawl their mother once wore. Yet neither paused to remember her scent or her laughter. They sat in silence for a while, surrounded by the emptiness of the home that had once given them everything. They mistook their father's humility for weakness, forgetting that it was his humility that kept the ancestors' blessings alive. Far away, under the same night sky, Obidi sat beside a flickering fire. The flames danced before him like restless spirits, whispering memories he could not silence. His eyes softened as he stared into the light, and in that trembling glow, he saw her, Zuri, her laughter rising with the smoke. The scent of roasting maize filled his mind, and the echo of children's laughter drifted back from a time when his sons would run to him, calling, "Papa! Lift us higher." He remembered their small hands clutching his neck, their innocent eyes filled with dreams. My sons, he whispered to the fire, you once laughed beneath these stars. The memory burned as fiercely as the embers. He remembered Zuri's voice the day she told him, our children must never forget that the land breathes. It remembers us. And he had taught them just that. He had shown them how the soil held the stories of their ancestors, how every seed planted was a promise to the spirits. Yet now, those same sons walked through life as if the earth beneath them were theirs to own, not to honor. Tears gathered in his weary eyes. The fire crackled, then dimmed, as if bowing its head in sorrow. Long before madness became his name, Obidi had been the pride of Nsako. His fields stretched far, green as emeralds beneath the morning sun. The people would come to him for advice on crops, on rain, on the balance between man and spirit. They called him Obidi the Blessed. But blessings often draw envy, and envy brings temptation. One dry season, strangers came from beyond the hills, foreign traders carrying shining gold and promises of wealth. They said, sell us the sacred land by the river. We will make you rich. Obidi looked at the soil beneath his feet, then at the sky, and said firmly, you cannot sell your ancestors. His words angered them, and when he refused again, they turned the village against him, whispering lies into the ears of greedy men. He is holding us back, they said. Slowly, the people withdrew their trust. His crops began to fail. The rain turned away. Even Zuri's gentle smile faded as sickness crept into their home. One by one, friends stopped visiting, and children began calling him cursed. Still, he stood firm. Better to starve with honor, he told Zuri, than feast with the bones of our ancestors. But when death came, it took everything. The night Zuri died, thunder rolled across the heavens like a cry of gods. For 3 nights, rain fell over Nsako without rest. The villagers whispered, the gods mourn the woman of Obidi. Yet within that storm, a home was broken beyond repair. Kinna and Jabo, still young but hardened by hunger and shame, turned their grief into anger. You did this, Kinna spat, his eyes cold. You and your foolish pride. Jabo added, we could have lived better, father. We could have been like the others. They packed their few clothes and left before dawn. Obidi called after them, his voice lost in the rain. My sons, don't let the world steal your soul. But they did not look back. From that moment, silence claimed his heart. He stopped speaking to men and began whispering to the wind, to the soil, to the unseen spirits that still lingered near Zuri's grave. Years later, people found him beneath the sacred tree, carving 2 small wooden figures every night. The children would mock him, throwing pebbles, laughing. The madman makes dolls, they would cry. But Obidi would smile softly, brushing the dust from the carvings. They are my sons, he would say gently. They will return when the wind forgives. His hands were steady though his eyes were tired. Each stroke of the knife was a prayer, each carving a memory. When he finished, he would lift the figures toward the sky, whispering blessings for Kinna and Jabo, that they might remember the songs of their mother and the lessons of their father. The wooden sons never spoke, yet they listened better than men ever had. Meanwhile, inside the council hut, greed brewed like a storm. The chief of Nsako sat before Kina and Jabo, his eyes gleaming with deceit. "Great sons of Zuri," he said, smiling broadly, "you have returned with riches. Let us make Nsako prosper. The sacred land by the river, why not build a trading post there? It will bring glory to your name." Kina leaned forward eagerly. "The same land our father guarded like treasure?" The chief nodded slyly. "That old fool clung to superstition. But you are men of vision." Elder Nyambi, who sat quietly in the corner, slammed his staff against the ground. "That land is not for sale," he warned. "The blood of the ancestors sleeps there. Disturb it, and you will awaken sorrow." But the chief's laughter drowned his voice. "Old men fear change," he sneered. And the twins, blinded by pride, nodded their agreement. That night, the air over Nsako grew heavy. The wind whistled through the baobab branches like a cry from the past. Old women in their huts muttered, "The ancestors are restless tonight." Even the goats bleated nervously. Obidi felt the shift in his bones long before the wind reached his face. He looked up from his carvings, the fire beside him flickering strangely. "It begins," he whispered. The carvings seemed to shiver in his hands, as if they too sensed what was coming. He pressed them gently against his heart and closed his eyes, praying for mercy that would not come. When the next morning came, word spread that Kina and Jabo had bought the sacred land. Obidi's heart shattered. With fury that felt older than his years, he marched toward the council hut. The crowd gasped as the madman burst in, his voice thunderous. "You bring death upon your own blood," he roared. The chief laughed mockingly. "Ah, the ghost speaks again." But Obidi's eyes burned with fire. "You sell what cannot be owned," he cried. "That land holds the bones of your fathers." The crowd jeered, shouting insults. Kina's face darkened with shame and anger. "Enough," he shouted, striking his father across the face. The slap echoed through the hut. For a moment, silence reigned. Then laughter erupted, cruel, hollow, unforgiving. Obidi fell to his knees, clutching the small wooden figures. "Still," he whispered, tears mingling with the dust, "you are my sons." The heavens answered that night. Clouds gathered like dark spirits. Lightning tore through the sky, and thunder rolled with the rage of ancestors awoken. Rain poured down, drenching the earth until rivers overflowed. The sacred tree swayed violently under the storm's fury. In one blinding flash, lightning struck its heart, splitting it in two. The ground trembled. Villagers screamed and fled as sparks flew into the sky. In the midst of chaos, Obidi stood motionless, his face lifted to the storm. His soaked tunic clung to his frail frame, but his eyes shone with strange peace. "They have heard," he whispered. "The ancestors have spoken." By morning, Nsako was eerily silent. The sacred tree lay in ruins, its once mighty trunk burned black, its roots still smoking. The air smelled of ash and sorrow. Elder Nyambi wept beside it, his voice breaking as he whispered prayers for forgiveness. "The spirits warned us," he murmured. But no one listened. Kina and Jabo hid inside their house, afraid to show their faces. Outside, Obidi sat calmly under the fallen branches, his hands resting on the two wooden figures. His eyes were distant, as if he could see something beyond the living world. Children watched him from afar, too scared to speak. The villagers gathered, whispering among themselves. "Perhaps madness is not madness," one woman said softly. "Perhaps he hears what we cannot." The wind moved gently through the burnt leaves, carrying with it the faint echo of Zuri's laughter, a reminder that the truth, no matter how painful, always returns. The night sky above Nsako quivered with an unspoken warning. Thunder ripped through the darkness, shaking the air and rattling the rooftops of mud-brick homes. Dark clouds twisted above the sacred hills, thick and heavy like the judgment of unseen gods. Even the birds, who once danced across the moonlit skies, fell silent, hiding among the branches of trembling trees. Villagers huddled in their huts, hearts pounding, as a dread unlike any they had known settled over the land. Whispers traveled from one doorway to another. "The gods are angry. They have awakened, and this is no peace they bring." The winds carried a metallic scent, sharp with the promise of punishment, and the fires that still glimmered from the festival flickered erratically, as if afraid to shine. Every shadow stretched long and strange, and even those who had scorned Obidi felt a prickling fear, as if the earth itself had grown restless. By dawn, the devastation became undeniable. The crops, once green and proud beneath the sun, lay trampled and rotting, flattened as if some invisible hand had punished them for their greed. The village river ran thick and red, mirroring the hue of blood in the early light. Goats collapsed without cause, their cries echoing against the hills. Elder Nyambi, usually stoic and measured, gathered the remaining elders beneath the broad acacia, their eyes wide with terror. "The spirits have been provoked beyond forgiveness," he said, voice trembling. "The ancestors speak through the land and the wind. We have brought shame upon ourselves." Their hands shook as they gripped their staffs, their voices mingling in chants of warning and repentance. No one dared move, for the silence of the observing spirits pressed down upon them, heavy and accusing. When the storm finally calmed, a strange emptiness gripped the village. Obidi was gone. His small hut, once alive with the whispers of prayers to the wind, sat abandoned. Some said madness had finally claimed him, a spirit claimed by grief and sorrow. Others whispered that he had walked into the sacred grove, seeking judgment from the ancestors themselves, leaving the world of men behind. Only the wooden carvings remained, lined neatly under the sacred tree, silent witnesses to truths too heavy for mortal hearts to bear. No footprints marred the earth leading from the grove, only the faint tremor in the soil, as if the land had swallowed him whole. The villagers stood uncertain, the wind twisting around them, carrying the faintest echo of Obidi's voice, and they wondered whether the line between man and spirit had always been thinner than they knew. 3 nights later, restless spirits began to stir. An unnatural wind tore through Nsako, bending trees and snatching fire from hearths. Flames ignited in huts without warning, licking the night sky with smoke and shadow. The scent of rain mingled with burning wood, sharp and acrid, filling every corner of the village. Women clutched their children close, eyes wide with fear, as deep, haunting laughter rolled from the sacred grove. It was a voice both familiar and terrifying, Obidi's voice carried on the wind, mingling with the unseen spirits, shaking the hearts of those who had forgotten their reverence. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward the grove, every flicker of flame dancing to an unseen rhythm. Fear wrapped the village in its thick, cold embrace, reminding them that some truths cannot be ignored and that the living must always respect what belongs to the ancestors. Kinna and Jabo could not escape the terror that had taken root in their hearts. Sleep abandoned them, and every rustle of wind, every distant crack of thunder, felt like their father's wrath. Their pride had been replaced with guilt, their laughter with trembling. "Do you hear that?" Kinna whispered, voice shaking. "It is him. Papa." Jabo gripped his brother's arm, nodding, fear making his body rigid. The drums that had once accompanied festival nights now beat invisibly in the darkness, calling them toward judgment. Desperate, they seized torches and moved toward the grove, guided by a voice that seemed to pierce their very bones. The wind pushed them forward, carrying with it the smell of fire and earth, until they found themselves before the sacred tree. The air thrummed with power, ancient and merciless. Under the silver glow of the moon, they beheld the carvings. Arranged in a perfect circle around the scorched tree, each wooden figure bore faces twisted with agony, unmistakably their own. Their breaths caught in their throats as the reality sank in. Their father had made the spirit of their guilt visible. Flames danced on the scorched earth, casting the figures into moving shadows. One carving was missing, the figure of Obidi himself. The silence between them was broken only by the whisper of wind and the low hum of energy that seemed to rise from the soil. The carvings hummed with unseen life, their polished wood trembling in anticipation, as if the land itself had awakened to witness their reckoning. Fear gripped Kinna and Jabo, and they trembled on the edge of understanding that some acts of disrespect cannot be undone. Then he appeared. From the shadows, Obidi stepped forward, a figure both human and spirit, half formed from flesh, half from the ethereal glow of ancestors' favor. His eyes glowed like dying embers, warm yet fierce, filled with the weight of decades of pain and love. His voice, when he spoke, was gentle yet rolled across the grove like thunder. "You mocked madness," he said, "but madness kept me human. I remembered what you forgot, that blood and soil are one. You cannot sever what was never yours to claim." Kinna and Jabo fell backward, their torches clattering to the ground. The air seemed to pulse around Obidi, bending the shadows and the smoke into shapes that whispered of old truths and broken promises. The siblings could not speak, their voices were stolen by awe and terror. Their knees struck the scorched earth as they begged for mercy, tears carving channels through the dust on their faces. "Father, forgive us!" Kinna cried, clutching the trembling soil. Jabo sobbed beside him. "We were blind, we were fools." They reached out for him, for the warmth of the man they had once scorned, but Obidi did not move. Only his glowing eyes met theirs, unwavering, witnessing the weight of their arrogance. The drums of the ancestors beat faintly beneath the hum of wind, relentless in their rhythm, reminding the twins that some wrongs are heavier than flesh and bone can carry. Silence, thick and potent, wrapped the grove. Then the earth itself rose in judgment. The ground cracked with a sound like bones breaking, sending tremors through the circle of carvings. The sacred tree swayed violently, its charred roots ripping free from the soil. Kinna and Jabo screamed, reaching for their father, but the land consumed the carvings one by one, swallowing them into the depths. Flames licked the exposed roots, and the air thickened with the taste of soil and ash. Obidi remained unmoved, a calm force of light and shadow, glowing brighter with each second as the earth devoured all that had betrayed him. The twins fell to the ground, their bodies pressed to the trembling soil, helpless beneath the unstoppable fury of the sacred land. As dawn broke, the chaos ceased. The sacred tree, the carvings, and the scorched earth sank slowly into the ground, leaving only an empty hollow where the grove had stood. Obidi was gone, vanished into the soil with the tree, leaving only a faint trace of warmth and his voice carried by the wind. "Truth has been heard," it whispered, "neither curse nor blessing, only clarity." The villagers emerged, kneeling in awe and terror, realizing the justice of the ancestors had been served. Their greed, their laughter, and their disbelief had been measured and found wanting. In the quiet that followed, only the echo of drums remained. Deep, distant, eternal, they rolled over the hills and valleys, speaking of lessons that would outlive generations. Children huddled closer to their mothers, and elders bowed their heads in reverence. From that day onward, the story spread across Nsako and beyond, a tale of a man called Mad, yet chosen by the ancestors to restore balance. They whispered that madness is not always folly, that sometimes it is the voice strong enough to speak the weight of truth, carrying justice where ordinary men could only stumble. The wind continued to whisper through the hills, and for those who listened, it told a story of blood, soil, and the undying spirit of a father who refused to bend before greed. Weeks passed over Nsako, and the sky, once heavy with anger, finally softened. Rain fell gently upon the land, its touch tender, like a mother's hand soothing a child. The parched soil drank deeply, darkening under the blessing of water, and tiny green shoots pushed stubbornly through the earth, promising life once more. The scent of wet soil rose into the air, mingling with the smoke of hearths and the faint perfume of wildflowers. Villagers stepped out cautiously, whispering among themselves that the ancestors had accepted their repentance, that the storm was over and forgiveness had returned. Children splashed in shallow puddles, and elders raised their eyes to the clouds, murmuring thanks to those who watch from beyond the hills. Even the wind seemed gentler, carrying the faint hum of unseen spirits through the village paths. Kinna and Jabo moved silently among the wet fields, their heads bowed with sorrow and humility. They gathered stones and worn timber, reconstructing the sacred altar where their father had vanished into the earth. Carefully, they placed small carved figures and poured palm oil onto the stone surface, honoring the spirit of Obidi with reverence. Gone were the bright city clothes that once marked their arrogance, now they wore simple, humble garments woven from local fibers, the colors of the land itself. Their hands were calloused, their faces lined with grief, yet a quiet determination shone in their eyes. "Father," Kinna whispered, "we will remember." Jabo nodded, pressing a carved figure into the altar, murmuring prayers into the rain-soaked wind. The story of the sacred storm spread beyond Nsako, carried by travelers and whispered in the wind. Mothers would hush their children when tales of disrespect and greed arose, warning them never to mock the strange or forget the old ways. Drummers began soft rhythms at gatherings, honoring the spirit of Obidi, the man once called Mad, whose pain had restored balance to the land. Even those who had doubted the old stories felt the weight of memory settle upon their shoulders, realizing that the past was never truly gone, only waiting for hearts willing to listen. The children grew with reverence, learning that the spirits of the land are patient but just, that lessons ignored return like storms. Under the great acacia tree, Elder Nyambi, weary and burdened by guilt, gathered the villagers one evening. His voice trembled as he spoke, every word heavy with regret. "The true madness," he said, "is forgetting where you come from." Tears ran down his wrinkled cheeks, streaking the dust that clung to his skin. Greed blinded our eyes. Pride silenced our ears. We ignored what should have guided us. The villagers bowed their heads, some trembling, some weeping quietly, acknowledging the truth in his words. The elders who had once scoffed at Obidi's warnings now carried the weight of his legacy in their hearts, humbled by the mercy of the ancestors. As night fell, a soft wind arose from the sacred grove. It carried a faint laughter, warm and forgiving, threading through the village streets and over the hills. The villagers paused in their tasks, gazing toward the grove, sensing that the laughter was neither threat nor mockery, but a blessing of peace restored. The torches in the huts flickered as if spirits danced with the breeze, and for a moment, the world felt as though it had remembered its rhythm. Old songs returned to mouths long silent, and hearts were lighter with the knowledge that the line between the living and the ancestors could be one of love and guidance. Years passed quietly. Kinna and Jabo lived humbly, tending their crops, guiding travelers along the village paths, and teaching the younger generation about respect, balance, and the sacred land. They rebuilt not only the earth but themselves, learning that wealth and pride hold little weight against truth. Their hands were weathered, their laughter quieter, but the depth of their wisdom had grown. They no longer spoke of riches, only of belonging, of understanding the spirits of the land, and of honoring the bonds of blood and soil that no storm could sever. Generations later, travelers arrived at Nsako, drawn by whispers of the village where the sacred grove had once stood. Beneath the shade of an old wooden tree, they found two elderly men telling stories to laughing children. The villagers' eyes, bright with curiosity, watched as the men's voices wove history and legend together. When asked who they were, the men smiled gently, their eyes reflecting decades of knowledge and sorrow. "We are the sons of the Madman," they said simply, and the wind answered with a distant hum, carrying the truth of the story across the hills, binding the listeners to memory and lesson alike. The tale of Obidi became legend, traveling far from Nsako. In distant villages, people spoke of a man whose madness revealed the truth, whose pain restored balance, and whose humility surpassed pride. Children learned that wisdom often wears simple clothes, that the greedy may invite storms upon themselves, and that patience and love can heal what arrogance has broken. Songs were sung in his honor, drums beat softly in remembrance, and the land itself seemed to nod in approval at the lessons carried by the wind. As the sun sank behind the golden hills, painting the sky with fire and shadow, the wind carried a whisper through the sacred grove. From deep within, a soft, warm laughter rose, forgiving, eternal. The villagers paused, hearts still, feeling the presence of the man who had once been called mad. It was not the laughter of folly, but of peace returned, of balance restored, and of a legacy that would endure in every leaf, every stone, and every heartbeat of Nsako. The land, the people, and the spirits were whole again, and in the echo of that laughter, they understood at last that true wisdom is often hidden in what the world calls madness. Those who laugh at the broken often mock the mirror of their own fate. Respect your roots, for silence is not always madness, nor poverty a measure of worthlessness. Truth, like the wind, always returns home. The tale of Obidi reminds every soul that wisdom does not shout, and dignity does not wear fine clothes. In every forgotten elder, every humble man, and every wounded heart, the ancestors still speak. Those who listen find peace, those who mock will one day meet their reflection when the wind calls their name.